Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for an inside look at AMP and PWA, the CarParts Story. My name is Carly Sear. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Mobify, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We're very excited to have one of our customers here today, Simon Carpio. Simon serves as the Director of Product Management at US Auto Parts Network, where he oversees the development of its consumer websites that affect over 1 million products in the automotive aftermarket industry. He has worked on several internal and external products, including the development of pricing engines, product information systems, and search indexing solutions. And he is now focused on the website customer experience. As one of the first retailers to deploy accelerated mobile pages and a progressive web app, Simon will speak to his experience launching these technologies and the benefits CarParts has seen as a result. Now, just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we begin. First off, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who's registered after the fact, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. We will also have a live Q&A with Simon at the end of the webinar, so be sure to submit your questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by clicking the Q&A button in the top left nav of your Zoom dashboard. With that, I will pass it over to Simon to tell us about his experience with AMP pages and PWA.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Carly. So as Carly mentioned, my name is Simon Carpio. I'm Senior Director of Product Management at the US Auto Parts Network. And really what I wanted to share for this presentation was that we worked with Mobify and 64 Labs to release accelerated mobile pages, AMPs, and a progressive web app, PWA, earlier this year on one of our flagship websites, CarParts.com. During our earnings call for Q2, we mentioned that we saw a 35% increase in conversion rates year over year, and that was, had a lot to do with our focus on the customer experience. AMP and PWA was a part of that focus. So during this presentation, we are going to go over the benefits of AMP and PWA to any mobile UX strategy, some items to consider before or while building AMP and PWA, and finally, how to implement both AMP and PWA into your customer journey as a cohesive technology stack. But in order for me to easily, or in order for people to easily understand the benefits of AMP and PWA, I went ahead and structured this presentation into what I call the customer's moments of truth. So if you're thinking about moments of truth, these are areas in the customer journey where your customer is most likely to leave your website and decide not to make a purchase. At the very top of the funnel that you see on this slide, you'll see the landing experience. This is when a customer first lands on your website and is thinking, do I want to do business with this company? Does the company solve my need? Is there a value proposition that is important to me and is better than what the competitors have to offer? After that, you have product discovery or selection. As I said, US Auto Parts has over 1 million active SKUs at any given time. So how do I get the customer down to 2 or 3 products that that customer specifically needs and is specific to the vehicle's year, make, model, and sometimes even submodel and engine? After that, at the bottom of the funnel, you have the transaction experience, which is how do you allow customers to transact the way they want to? If the customer wants to go through PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Venmo, are those options available on your website? How hard is it to get through checkout without having to create an account or sign up for notifications and promotions? Finally, there's the post-purchase experience. How do you ensure that after customers make an order, they still feel like they're being taken care of? Getting the white glove treatment after the purchase is made. In all of these things, you have to rely on speed, and that's why speed's sort of at the very bottom there. Speed is now one of the most important assets to your company's mobile strategy. AMP and PWA are the things that first and foremost address speed. So when we're talking about AMP versus PWA, let's first talk about why speed is important, and then jump into how AMP and PWA can improve your site speed and add to the overall user experience. So why is mobile speed important? Well, as you can see on this slide, you can improve your site speed by using AMP and PWA. But poor performance equals lost opportunity. I actually took the next two slides from the Google I/O this year. So you can see here, after 3 seconds, you get a 53% bounce rate. A 79% of customers abandon the cart or abandon the website if the site's performance is poor. And for every second delay on your site, you can expect to see a 7% drop in revenue. So that's the impact. Now, if you want to put it another way, if you want to understand really what your customers are experiencing as they're going through a slow website experience, you'll see in this graph a stress index. So waiting in line at a retail store, watching a horror movie, actually less stressful to a customer than experiencing a slow website. Really, the only thing more stressful than experiencing a slow website is solving a math problem. So if you want to understand your customer's experience, that is where a slow website sits. So let's actually talk about accelerated mobile pages and how it helps with speed. So first, what is an accelerated mobile page? AMP is an open source library built on top of HTML. It doesn't really like JavaScript, so we'll get into that closer to the end of, or closer to the con section of this discussion. And the main thing you want to note here is that there are 3 components to AMP. There's the AMP HTML, AMP.js, and AMP cache. What you're really looking to do here is create a page so that Google can cache it and serve it themselves. If you do a Google search for CarParts.com, you'll see that lightning bolt icon that you see on the slide underneath the link, and that means that the page is being cached by Google. Google actually delivers it. So if you look at the URL, when you click into the link, it'll actually say www.google.com/ and then the domain. Now, let's talk about the accelerated mobile page. Let's talk about the pros here, where accelerated mobile pages are being hosted. So the good thing is it's actually supported by several different platforms and vendors. So if you're looking at your traffic sources and which traffic sources AMP will have a positive impact on, which is what you want to do for AMP, you want to look at how much of your traffic is coming in from organic links and how much of your organic traffic is coming in through Google, Bing, or Baidu. Unfortunately, only Yahoo Japan supports AMP, so you're going to want to exclude Yahoo from your business case. There's also third-party tags and tracking. So you're also going to want to take a look at the third-party tags on your website. It was mentioned on ampprojects.org that not all, or it was mentioned earlier actually during this presentation, that not all third-party JavaScript likes to work with AMP. So Google Analytics, if you're using that, that's actually a direct implementation into AMP. However, if you're using Adobe Analytics, it does work, but it has a roundabout way to implement. New Relic also works, and a lot more vendors are coming up in support of AMP. Again, the main thing here is you want to look at what percentage of traffic is coming in from these search engines or any third-party JavaScript that is important to your business. You can go to ampproject.org to see a list of vendors that support AMP. Second list of pros here. I've heard people call AMP a stripped down page, but it really has evolved since 2016, where it was originally created to feed news articles and blogs in less than 2 seconds. And I think Google actually published that they serve AMP pages on average in half a second. So that's about 500 milliseconds. And this is on mobile network speeds. AMP is really not just a static cache page anymore that serves text content the same way it used to be. There are actually several features available that you can build within AMP to treat your landing page like a true e-commerce experience. You have things like geolocation. You can do things like add to cart. There are drop downs, sort and filter that you can do in AMP. So you'll actually see on our website, www.carparts.com, the drop-down functionality that we have here on search. So another set of pros here is that there are business cases out there already for companies that have moved into AMP. You'll see carve.com increased conversions by 75%, Merchology 39%, eventticketcenter.com 20%. You have other websites like trip.com, which are fully AMP from end to end. So if you're walking into an executive meeting or a board discussion, you have a lot of business cases out there already that have proven the success of AMP. Now, here are some of the cons. AMPs, although they do have some feature sets for the e-commerce experience, it does not have everything. If you're looking to provide web push notifications, add to home screen, or an offline mode so that if customers are not online or have spotty internet connections, they can still view certain pages on your site, that's not going to be supported by AMP. Also, again, not all vendors currently support AMP. Those that do support AMP may have complex implementations. So this is the Adobe Analytics that we were talking about. Next, it also adds a layer of complexity and overhead to current operations. So there are guidelines for how to set up an AMP page. And again, you're setting it up only for Google to cache it. So they're telling you how to build these pages. You're going to have a canonical page. This is the main page that you have created. And then you're going to have the AMP version of the page. So it's important also that every time you make a change, you add an enhancement or a widget to your website, that you're also going to want to make sure that that's represented on the AMP page. And then this is not good for pages that require constantly refreshing content or heavy API calls. So in our line of business, certain SKUs, depending on the year, make, and models that are coming in, or maybe there was a return, so a certain line item of a vehicle application on that SKU has to come off. We're constantly updating the data for the different SKU sets. Now imagine that blown out to 10, 20, or 50 SKUs that show up on a search results page. So if your business is similar to that and you have situations where it's either too many pages to cache or the pages that are cached have to constantly be refreshed, then AMP might not be the solution for you, at least further down the funnel. We also have an example here of Prop 65, wherein California Proposition 65 basically states that if there are any hazardous materials in your products, that you have to state them. So we went ahead and did that, which required a symbol specifically within the Prop 65 section, and that actually made our pages AMP invalid. So you should actually expect that, that certain enhancements to the pages might make your pages AMP invalid. So you're going to have to staff for it and think about how, whenever you get AMP error messages in the Google Search Console, how do you solve that quickly so that you continue to serve your pages through the Google cache. And then also, more importantly, is there's no support on certain traffic types. So if you're looking at things like Google Shopping, dynamic search ads, text ads, if most of your traffic is coming in from there, AMP is probably not going to impact your business as much as if it were just coming in from organic traffic. So here is AMP in action. So even before I finish the sentence, you can see here CarParts.com, which has an AMP homepage fully loaded. On the right-hand side, we have jcwhitney.com, also one of our properties, just a responsive site, and that took much longer to load. And again, both of these are on 4G AT&T connections, so just your standard mobile connection. So now let's talk about progressive web apps, where AMP was a very concrete library. Progressive web apps, really, you want to think about it as an overarching principle and guidelines to the mobile experience. So the goal here is that you have a mobile website that is similar in form and functionality to a native app. So these two things are different, and I've heard a lot of people, even a lot of vendors, get confused on what a progressive web app is and a native app is. So just know that these two things are different. The progressive web app has the reach of the web, right? It's accessible through Google, Yahoo, Bing, whereas a native app is downloaded through a store. So one of the main things about progressive web apps is service workers. What service workers allows you to do is basically everything we mentioned that AMP pages could not do. So if you want to add things like web push notifications, you want to allow your customers to add your website to their home screen. You want to allow customers offline mode and being able to access your website when they're offline. These are things that AMP does not support yet, but you'll be able to get through the use of service workers. Service workers also has support across several different browsers. So you'll see there it's on Chrome for Android, Safari, iOS Safari, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, most of the big ones out there. However, do note that Safari, you know, I think even as of Safari 12, there's only a limited support on PWAs. What that means is, for example, if you wanted to add to home screen on your Safari browser, it wouldn't be a prompt that shows up and says, would you like to add CarParts.com to home screen? Instead, it's hidden behind the share button. So when you hit that share button, then you'll get the ability to add to home screen. So this is another area that you're going to want to look at. Outside of the type of traffic that you have, you're also going to want to look at browser usage. If your customers are using primarily iOS Safari, know that they're not going to get the full experience that they get on Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. So what are some of the pros of progressive web apps? So again, it's those advanced web features using service workers. It's pre-fetching. It's being able to actually take and fetch some of the data in the subsequent pages. So if a customer is on a search results page, you can actually start loading into the local cache things like the title, the price, maybe even the low resolution image, so that when the customer clicks into that SKU, all that stuff is loaded up almost instantly on the product detail page. Web push notifications. So this is the prompt that shows up that says, would you like CarParts to start sending you notifications? They click yes, they add that, and now they're part of your ecosystem of promotions, discounts, and what have you. Add to home screen, similar thing, and then offline mode. Also, this Google really pushed this during their I/O this year. Progressive web apps follow the principles of FIRE. It's fast, it's integrated. Integrated means it actually looks like a native app, even though it's being accessed through the web. It's reliable. Again, having that offline mode, regardless of no internet connection or spotty connections, the customer can still access your site. And what you're hoping for is, because it's fast, integrated, and reliable, that ultimately it's engaging, so that customers come back, want to shop on your site more and more often. Now, some of the cons here is that the initial load may be slower. It's definitely going to be slower than an AMP page. You're probably not going to hit that half-a-second page load time. It also may not be the optimized approach for Google Shopping. So on CarParts.com, we saw significant conversion lifts on organic and direct traffic. However, when we looked at our paid sources of traffic, the lift just wasn't quite as significant. So that's, again, something you want to take in mind. It also, like AMP, adds a layer of complexity. So there's really two ways you can build a progressive web app. You can do an actual app that has its own set of API calls, or you can web parse. This is basically where the progressive web app sends the information over to your actual desktop or responsive site, and then passes that back over to progressive web app. That could take a lot longer. That also adds a layer of complexity, because if you change any fields or any of your styling on the desktop site or responsive site, that could cause the progressive web app some issues. So do be aware of that. Now, I get this question a lot, is can you submit the progressive web apps to the stores as native apps? Someone actually has submitted to all three stores, the Microsoft Store, Google Play Store, and App Store, and he was successful at doing it. So the short answer is yes. However, if you want to learn more about it, I have linked the source of that blog and what that person had to go through to submit his PWA as a native app. So we're talking about a lot of increases in complexity and overhead. This may be one way that you can actually reduce that. So here's our PWA in action. So you'll see it's very much like a native app. There's lazy loading involved here. I'll go into the hamburger menu in a second here. It'll open up like that. I'll do a search. And again, this is one where we have fetched the title, the pricing, so all that stuff can load up. We did avoid loading the low resolution images. We went instead for just loading the higher resolution images because we believe there would be a conversion impact if we instantaneously loaded the lower resolution images. So here's a part that I actually still find slow, we're still working on, was that adding to cart and then viewing cart. So there is some work that still needs to be done here. So to wrap it up, the difference between AMP and PWA is really that AMP is a concrete library and there are specific requirements there, while PWA is an overarching methodology. AMP pages get their benefits because they can load in that sub 2 second. However, PWAs have the advanced e-commerce features. So what you want to ultimately do is marry these two things. And the way to do that is through this AMP install service worker. So you've built up a lot of goodwill loading your landing pages in sub 2 seconds. What the AMP install service worker allows you to do is you start to install the service worker on the AMP page so that these service workers can start to warm up the cache, start prefetching data so that when the customer moves from an AMP landing page into the progressive web app, there's still that goodwill. It still seems fast. It still feels like a smooth native app experience. So coming back to this, where do you apply AMP? Where do you apply PWA? My suggestion would be on landing, make sure that it's an AMP page. Get that sub 2 second load time, reduce that bounce rate. Amazon, if you're looking at the marketplaces and what they do as treatment, Amazon links to their native app. They have 175 million active users a month, so I get that. Walmart is not on AMP. eBay has some AMP out there. For product discovery, again, you're going to want to think about how often do you have to refresh pages. Also, how heavy are your calls to create search results pages and product listing pages. So if you want, you can go AMP if your catalog and your products offerings are relatively simple. If not, you may want to move into PWA in that step. Same thing for the transaction experience. If you want just the regular Google Payment Request API and that's active on your users' devices, then you can go ahead and actually use AMP. However, if you want to offer things like your regular checkout, Google Pay, Apple Pay, all these different things, then you're going to want to move into the progressive web app. And then obviously for the post-purchase experience, having push notifications, reaching out to customers that way, adding to home screen, maybe even adding to home screen so that you can tell your customers where their order is. So instead of landing them on your home page, you land them to the order tracking page. That's a useful feature. That adds to the post-purchase experience. Now, if you were to ask me, obviously, do we build versus buy? We bought this. We worked with Mobify and 64 Labs. I'm not a paid spokesperson, but I can definitely say that it was worthwhile. We got the PWA and AMPs out to market relatively quickly, whereas Twitter, Forbes, LinkedIn all took about 18 months to build their progressive web app. The other interesting thing here, or the other valuable thing about buying it, was having the dashboard set up wherein we could send push notifications immediately after launching. So as customers subscribe, we didn't have to build that whole dashboard out. We didn't have to build that functionality out. I could take that, send it over to marketing and say, hey guys, here's this new tool. It's awesome. You should go ahead and use it. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I hope that with this, you guys understand the difference between AMP and PWAs, but more importantly, how to use both to create an engaging mobile experience. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Simon. We're getting a couple of questions here, so we'll jump into those. And a reminder, you can continue to submit your questions through the webinar dashboard. So the first one here, you spoke a little bit to the difference between native app and PWA. And there's a question here on what would be the reasoning for having both, or would there be a reason to have both?
So I would say that you can have both. Ultimately, it comes down to where PWAs are now versus where native apps are. So you're not going to have access to things like contacts, SMS, the customer's gallery through progressive web apps. If you need something like that for the line of business that you're in, go ahead and continue to use native apps. In my line of business, we don't really need those added features. We don't need access to Bluetooth, the near field chip. So ultimately, and also to add to that is, we don't really see customers looking to buy car parts or auto parts in the stores, in the app stores. We really see the reach on the web. So you really just want to think about those things. What are the features you need for your line of business, and where are customers ultimately searching for it? Where do you get the most exposure?
Great, thanks. The next question here, as one of the few retailers with a PWA, are there any pitfalls or learnings you could share from your experience?
Yes, definitely. So one was definitely the tagging. I spoke a little bit about Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, how some third-party tags were a bit hard to implement. That's one thing I wish I sort of fleshed out more before taking this on, because that was one of the tougher things that we had to do or went through as we were building out the progressive web app. So don't expect your data to be complete, or the accelerated mobile pages specifically. Don't expect your data to be completely clean. Test it a lot. Make sure your AMP pages are sending the right data to your analytics dashboard. The second thing also, and this was actually from Google themselves, is that AMP installed service worker. What I tend to see people do is that they'll put a new subdomain for their AMP pages. They'll call it amp.carparts.com or what have you. Google actually told me that the domains need to be the same. So if your domain is www, your AMP page also needs to be www.domain.com/AMP, because otherwise that AMP installed service worker doesn't like to work very well. So those were two of the main things that I'd have you guys look at definitely to start, because these were things that I had issues with. Another thing also, again, is looking at your traffic sources, looking at the browser usage, and making sure that your line of business can actually benefit from these new technology stacks.
Great. There's another one here with respect to iOS. Did you run into any shortcomings with Safari on iOS? For instance, they don't currently support push notifications. Were there other traps or shortcomings?
Yeah, so no support of push notifications was a big one. The add to home screen being hidden. Other than that, just really looking at conversion rates, it performed as good as or slightly less than the other browser types. So really no major issues. It was just all this additional service worker features that Apple doesn't have that Chrome and Firefox do have.
Perfect. And could you shed a little more light on why the paid traffic didn't see as much of a lift?
So I can't speak to numbers specifically. We are a publicly traded company, but what I believe is happening is that typically when you're on paid, you're sort of inserting the customer mid funnel already. So things like are having AMP landing pages as sort of top funnel. They didn't really get to experience that. Also, you saw from the example that we gave in the presentation was the PDP to cart was not quite as fast yet, right? It wasn't quite there yet. So I think those were a couple of things. Overall, I think that PWAs can work. I just don't think it's going to have that much of an advantage over a responsive site, since you're already sort of mid-funnel going into cart and then proceeding to checkout.
Another question here on AMP. Someone asked, how did you choose which pages to turn into AMP pages?
That was really just based on traffic volume. We looked at all of our landing pages, defined which ones had the most traffic volume, and then worked on those.
Great. And we'll take one final question here, and then if we missed anyone's questions, we're happy to follow up after. Did you have to add any resources to your team to maintain both your accelerated mobile pages and progressive web app?
So I actually cannot speak to how we're maintaining it today. But what I will say is, if you do have an engineering pod working on this, whether it's, the Mobify 64 Labs team or your own team, chances are part of that team is going to remain to go ahead and work on the different things that come up, AMP invalids on your Google Search Console. You change something on the website that ends up breaking something on your progressive web app. So again, do expect it. How you go about and staff it is really dependent on how your organization is structured.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, well, thank you so much, Simon, for your time today. That's all we've got for today. And just a reminder, we will send out a recording of the webinar as well. So you'll see that in your inbox in the next 24 hours. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and hope you have a great day.
All right, thank you guys.